Hello, it's Bobby Torres of Firebox Recording here with some tips on mixing heavy kick drum. I've decided to make this video because people seem to overcomplicate the whole kick drum thing for whatever reason. Now, I've been guilty of it myself where I kind of followed set rules in the past of, I'm always going to use this EQ curve on my kick or this compressor setting. And what I found, the most effective way to go about it, personally, in my opinion, is to really listen to the sound you're working with, whether it's something you've recorded yourself or it's something that someone else has recorded, and ask yourself, what does this kick drum need? It might contain everything that you need it to contain, or it might be severely lacking. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to play the audio sample here. This is a rock band that I've worked with, a band called Blue Lizard, really talented kids. And the drummer's actually really good and really consistent. But even though it's rock, all of these techniques can be applied to metal. So let's take a listen to the audio, or the kick drum in particular. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to explain how this particular sound is achieved. So if you see here, there's a track that just says kick. That's actually the live kick. That's his original kick drum track, completely, straight from the API preamp right into Pro Tools. And the other track is a sample of the exact same kick. And what I mean by that is at the end of the session, I had him play a bunch of hard hits of his kick drum, and I made samples out of his actual kick drum. So there's a sample of his kick drum blended in with his kick drum. So this isn't a sample that I downloaded or from a sample pack. This is actually the original kick sound. And people ask me what's the point of this? And for me, it's just extra reinforcement, extra punch. In this case, it's only adding a little bit of extra push. He's a very consistent hitter. Not that there's anything wrong with pre-made samples. I've used them in the past. I've kind of gotten away from it because I find that they're overly processed, and I'm the type of guy where I like to process as little as possible, go for as natural of a sound as possible. But again, that's just my own personal preference and my own personal taste. So there's nothing wrong with pre-made samples, and people use them successfully all the time. So let's hear these kick drums with all of the processing, and it's again, one kick drum just with a sample added, but with all processing completely bypassed. And I'm going to play the original kick. So this is the live kick drum. Let's see here. Okay. All right, let's take a listen. Okay, so from the source, it's a pretty decent sounding kick. Part of the reason is he's a good player, and also I spent a lot of time getting the mic in the right spot. I think I used an Audix D6, and if you've never checked out that microphone, check it out. It kind of it's pre-EQ'd in such a way where it's hard to go wrong with it. So right away, as you can tell, there's some bleed happening, and the first thing that I try to do is I try to get rid of as much of that as possible without it sounding clippy or bizarre in any way. So I'm going to completely just eliminate what I had on the track, and now we're just working with the bare track. So I pull up a gate generally first because you don't want to gate after you compress, because if you gate post-compression, you're bringing up stuff below the threshold that's going to trigger the gate, when in reality, a lot of that you don't want to be affected by the compressor at all. So anyway, we're going to gate first. Okay, so let's hear it without the gate. Go back to the kick drum by itself. Okay, now I'm going to enable the gate and adjust the threshold. Okay, so anything below here is being drastically reduced in volume, and that's intentional because I want to cut out as much bleed as possible. Sometimes you might want the bleed, but for rock and metal, as little bleed as possible. Unless you're doing something completely different. But for me, most of the time, I want it out of there. And then from there, I need a little bit of EQ. So I'm going to bring up one of my favorite plugins here, the Metrics Halo metric halo channel strip. I always messed that up. Okay, so let's listen. Oh, to my ears, the kick already has a decent attack, so I don't want to go crazy. I don't want to boost it a million dB in the top end. It just needs a little bit, so let's see. Cool. Okay, and already I like that sound more. It's cleaning up a little of the boxiness that's happening in the lower mid-range. Or the mid range, I guess around the 1K area, the 700 1K area. That's generally where you would have some boxiness happening. Now, I didn't go crazy because this sound, again, because of the microphone that I was using, it kind of already had that nice attacky kind of kick sound just at the source. And from there, we need a little bit of compression just to kind of level them out a little. So let's see. Let's switch this to the smooth setting. Instead of, I don't want anything nuts. 4-to-1 ratio. Now, your ratio you can play with it, plus every compressor sounds different. This is just, I know this compressor very well because I've been using it for years, and I just love the attack that I get and the punch that I get with a slower attack, faster release, and a ratio that's not too crazy high, at least with this particular plugin. If I was using like the SSL channel strip, it would be different, but the important thing is to use your ears. Don't go by set rules. Again, because the source itself already had a punchy sound, so I don't have to go crazy. It's just kind of like the icing on the cake type of thing here. So let's see. Yeah. Okay, so let's hear it without the compression and EQ. Yeah, it's just got a little more attack. A little more attack and a little more punch. But I really like the source sound, so I didn't want to kind of bastardize it. I wanted to just be a slightly molded version of what it originally was. So now let's listen to the sample. The sample's the same drum, so technically I could just apply the exact same processing to it, but let's listen to it for the heck of it. So I'm gonna solo the sample. This is the sample with absolutely dry. Okay, so right off the bat, it sounds punchier than the original, and the only reason why is because the sample was programmed to have 0 dynamics. And the reason being is the original kick has natural dynamics, and this is just here to reinforce it. They are multi-samples of his kick, but they are all of the exact same dynamics. So because of that, I'm not going to have to compress this. Or not, I mean, unless I want extra punch, but again, it already kind of sounds punchy, so I'm just going to sculpt it with a little bit of EQ. So I'm going to drag the same exact plugin over. I don't need the gate because there's no cymbal bleed because it's purely a sample on that particular track. So I'm going to drag over the gate and I'm going to bypass the compressor. Or I'm sorry, I dragged over the channel strip plugin. The gate is not engaged at all. And I'm only using the EQ. So the sample will be EQ'd but not compressed because in my opinion, it doesn't need it. It's just there for reinforcement. So let's hear this sample now with this EQ going on it. Yeah, I dig it. One more time without it. Let's see. One more time with it. Yeah, I dig it. Again, it's just a little bit of sculpting just to bring out the attack a little. I didn't go crazy because the microphone that I used in the session just naturally has a lot of attack. And that's my point here is that, you know, years and years ago, I would have just gone crazy. I would have just boosted tons of 10K and cut tons of 100 hertz or whatever I was doing at the time without even thinking about what was happening in the material that I'm working on. And in my opinion, that's really the secret to all this is that you want to consciously manipulate what needs to be manipulated, depending on your own personal taste. So let's hear the two kick drums combined. Yeah, so you have the natural varying dynamic of the original track, the original performance, which is already consistent to begin with. And then the sample is just underneath it, kind of just like pushing it along, just kind of making it extra solid. It's a very straightforward rock song, so you can get away with that. With metal, a lot of times in metal, you know, I might just go 100% sample. Again, I would be using a sample of the drummer's original kick drum. Just my personal preference, but that's a whole different. But either way, it's the same. I go through the exact same process, the same exact, you know, chain. Whether I'm using hardware or plugins, it's the same thing. You know, I'm only going to boost what I feel is needed. I'm only going to cut what I feel is needed, because you can cut mid range, and all of a sudden you have a really thin sounding kick drum. You can have tons of low frequency and tons of attack, but that mid range, you know, if you're listening on a phone or you're listening on a tablet or computer speakers, the meat is really in that mid-range. You know, you could have tons of 50 hertz, all this sub bass happening. It might sound like nothing because those speakers, you know, smaller speakers don't reproduce those low frequencies. So keeping your mids in check and making sure they're not too scooped is extremely important. And it's something that people don't talk about too much. People talk about it, but it's just not as popular as, you know, sample replacing and whatever else fancy stuff that people like become obsessed with. So, all right, let's listen to the kick drum in the mix one last time. Let's go back to our chorus here. All right, let's see. So there you go. That's my approach to mixing heavy kick drum. It may seem overly simple, but sometimes less is more. And remember, if it sounds good, it is good. So if you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, share. I think that's everything. And until next time, happy mixing.